Our next panel discussing, it's called High Standards. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. From the head of international relations for Boveda, let's hear it for Benny Patak. Paddock. Wake up, people.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Please sit down. Grab a mic, please, every one of you, so that, do we have enough mics? No?
No?
You have one more? There you go. Yes. Oh, you have one? I have my bad. My bad, my
Quite
bad.
all right. Math is hard.
My bad. That's true. Well, thank you for being here. So as introduced, my name is Benny Paddock. I work with Boveda. If you don't know the product, it's these small brown humidity bags. Find us. I explain you what and why. But it's not here. I'm not here for myself, but for this fantastic panel. We're going to talk about international regulation and what we can do for it, and what we can do to move to a successful business environment, right? And I have the panelists over here. I'll let you introduce yourself, but I give you an initiative question, which is, I mean, if we look at regulation, especially in a global context, you know, why you introduce yourself? What were like the challenges that you faced already? Maybe pick one that's either dramatic or it's just a good anecdote, right? So I'll start with you, Atia, so please.
Hi, my name is Atia Feroz. I'm the Executive Director of the International Cannabis Quality Standards Association. We bring together industry stakeholders to develop industry best practice guides, to work towards the development of a globalized cannabis standard, and to also advise policymakers. It's a good question that you asked, because the inspiration for the association came from a few different challenges I had. One of them would be consulting in Massachusetts, like really early days, and talking to a producer and helping them go through their batches. And that's when I found out that every 15 pounds is a batch in Massachusetts. So if you grow 1,000 pounds in one go, you still have to separate it into 15 pounds. There is no scientific reason for this. And so that was one of my frustrations, that there's a lot of things happening in standards that don't really make a lot of sense. And I wanted to sort of bring a mixture of science and logic into the development of standards that could be applied across the globe.
That makes a lot of sense. Sebastian.
Hi, my name is Sebastian Begri. So I started with science with a first cannabinoid test kit analysis, where you can do your cannabinoid test on site for producer, for breeders, and for pharmacists. So I got to step in also a little bit into the quality, where I found out that there was some lack into it. And as I start my business in Europe, so I was in the early days in 2014. I created CannaVape as the first CBD vape product, which actually gave me the biggest challenge, because as the first brand I put out in France, the French government attacked me right away, so I had to go through a 7-year trial, and that makes me understand that you have to be aware of regulation, and actually that our industries are always challenging regulation and quality. So that's my take to the industry for Europe.
Mm-hmm. Frederick.
Hello, my name is Frederick. Thank you for having me here. It's my first ICBC was in 2016. Since then, I took part in both of the tenders as entrepreneur as well as lawyer. And now we have a wholesale license, and we try to import from Israel, where you would think that GMP is GMP, but not. We have IMC GMP and EU GMP, and they don't comply with each other. In addition to this, for my wholesale company, we have a Rwandan investor and are building an 8-ton site in Rwanda, 50 kilometers away from Kigali, meaning we have to implement a completely new regulation. Rwanda is a small country, so basically they're starting from scratch. Even if they copy German regulation, let's say, who does enforce it? Who does all the work around it? Just having the paperwork is not enough. We need to fill it out, and I think you know it in your daily work that regulation, yes, but who lives it? And that's our big hustle we have at this given moment.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Havens. I'm the co-chair of the cannabis law practice at Saul Ewing. We're a full-service law firm across the United States. We have some clients in Europe as well. I'm a former federal regulator. I started my legal career with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. I think one of the earliest challenges I saw working in the cannabis space, and it's funny to say this out loud, I've been in the cannabis space now for almost 10 years, which I think makes me quite old and quite veteran in the cannabis space. In any event, when edibles first started to come online, a lot of state regulators were looking to the federal government to show them what the standards looked like for food products. And of course, the federal government said, nope, marijuana is illegal, so we're going to bury our head in the sand. We're not going to be helpful. We're not going to help you in research. And so states all have different edible requirements and products. And consumers who are going from state to state have wildly different experiences. And it's quite dangerous. And I think the challenge I've seen is when you have a federally illegal system like you have in the United States, there's just lack of partnership between the feds and the states. I will say, to my former colleagues' credit, in the federal government has taken a different view now, and research and partnerships have started to open up, but it is still light years behind where it should be. And so these states are really the laboratories of all of this, and there's trial and error, and unfortunately the error is usually borne out by patients, by consumers. And so whether we're talking about lack of harmony from country to country, we've tried to import hemp seeds from Europe into the United States, try doing that between countries that aren't really talking to each other and don't have the same standards. It's not so easy to do. It's a fun project for us, but for our clients, more time than they probably wanted to spend. So in any event, really appreciative to ICBC. It's great to be back after a few years away.
Great. Good.
Hello, everybody. My name is Götz Schneider-Rother. I'm an entertainment lawyer. And
so you have to be entertaining now as well, right?
I wanted to entertain. No, I'm from SKW Schwarz. We're a German full-service law firm as well, but have one of the biggest media and entertainment department. And yeah, I find it also what you just said is what we found now for the last 6, 7, 8 years is so many different rights issues that come across from other countries and everything. And it's the same for us. We can make money out of it, but it's a problem for the clients, definitely. So, and what we also found out is that the social media plays such an important role if it comes to finding rights infringements, marketing, when you market or distribute your products. And so that, yeah, I think that is one of the greatest challenges, to really also get the platforms, for instance, responsible for what's happening there. So, and yeah, I'm happy to say that we just had a very, very good decision against one of the big platforms, and so they have to be more aware of what they are distributing now. So it's interesting. We will talk about that.
Yeah. I want to talk about it right now, actually, because I find it very interesting. Because let's face it, pharma compliance is difficult, right? But let's talk about the reputation and the marketing compliance on the other hand, and especially that case that you just mentioned, because I want to know more about it.
Okay, we have enough time.
No, so
we don't have.
To be short,
so
but entertaining. Okay,
yeah,
so
absolutely short and entertaining. Yeah, it's interesting because we just it's meta, and we actually it's about deep fakes. So we all have to face deep fakes at that stage, and people are really suffering of it, and also competitors are suffering because products are distributed by deepfakes as well. Long story short, and we tried to cease and desist, make Meta cease and desist from that, what we were claiming, and at the end we won. And what means now, as a consequence, that now Meta has to control the own platform to avoid that identical or infringements that come close to the infringing activity is deleted from their platform. So they have to take care of it themselves. So this is the first time that we have that. Before, you always had to, if you ask for cease and desist undertaking, you always only had the chance to get removed, was what was part of the judgment. But now they have to turn around and watch their own platform and see what comes close to it and have to delete it as well.
But do you fear overblocking? I mean, if you force Meta to block in general,
No,
there will be overblocking. Honestly, I mean, the club I have with my beautiful fiancée, where is she? Zoe? Anyway, I mean, we advertise parties to see members for a cannabis club, and that should be okay. But our club, is constantly facing blocking from Instagram, which prevents us, and we don't. No, we just do. We have a party. We're an association of growers, which is allowed in Germany. We're looking out for members, and here's our community. This is what we do, and we're constantly overblocked. That's a huge problem, to my opinion, and hampers the industry in general.
Absolutely. I don't think this is the case here. No overblocking will happen here. It's the different.
It's interesting.
It's a different story.
Interesting topic because, like we see, for example, Facebook that is kind of trying to be more open to advertising for, in the case of CBD, which is like still hemp and cannabis at the end, but still in Europe, like the ban is really harsh. Like algorithms are really trigger every account, even some accounts are shut down. And it's interesting that you managed to pull it through because I think for the whole industry, if that would be more open, it would be easier to communicate and the right message and to have the right way to show also regulator because so far, yeah, it's like a jungle.
It is, absolutely.
One of the interesting things that is going on in the States that we talked about in the pre-discussion is hemp, the rise of hemp in the United States, right? So it used to be in 2018, 2019, you had hemp-derived cannabidiol CBD products, and the government was very concerned, I put that in quotes, about the safety of CBD. Now you see functional mushroom products, you see hemp-derived THC products virtually everywhere, and I'm not saying that there's unfettered advertising of these, you know, there's still word search bans and targets on Google and all of these other platforms, but it's almost as if our government and the platforms have just kind of decided we went a little overboard with CBD, we're going to let THC slide. And there's this competition now going on between hemp-derived THC companies and the marijuana companies like the multi-state operators, MSOs being quite heavily regulated, the hemp industry being talked about being regulated, but not quite so regulated. And so it's just this issue across the tech platforms, the regulators, and the collective decision that we're just not going to focus so much on hemp THC.
And geography as well, probably. I guess that Meta, Facebook, whatever, whoever, they will have different rules applied to the United States and Europe, obviously, because it's a different legal entity. So just for you, if you don't know, in hemp-derived THC is THC that's from hemp versus THC that's derived from cannabis, which in Europe is the same, right? It's we talked about it. It's we don't make a differentiation. In some states in the United States, it's not the same, right? So and you explained it that if it's derived from hemp, it's sometimes unregulated even, right?
Well, it's funny because there's two different laws that apply in the States. One is the Controlled Substances Act, which hemp, as long as it's 0.3% delta-9 THC or less by dry weight, it's federally legal in that it's not marijuana. But my former employer, the FDA, has said if you put it into a food or a dietary supplement or a beverage, it's illegal. So you would think that's the end of the discussion. Well, when you don't enforce that standard, which the FDA really hasn't unless you make pretty aggressive claims like this treats AIDS, COVID, diabetes, which companies have done somewhat shockingly, and not shockingly, they've gotten in trouble. But if you don't make claims, you don't get in trouble. And so there's a huge market in the United States right now for hemp THC.
I think that's actually one of the, like, it seems such a simple thing that should obviously be standardized globally, is like, where do we draw the limit on like what is THC or what is cannabis and what is hemp, right? So working in Switzerland was one of the first international jobs I had, and they go up to 1%, and Canada's 0.3 and Germany's 0.2, and I don't understand why we all can't get together and just make a determination. I've had things leave Canada that leave as CBD, or sorry, leave as THC and arrive in Switzerland as hemp because they are completely different levels. And that's such a nightmare when you're dealing with the regulators because you're just like, no, it's leaving as a narcotic and a controlled substance, but it's arriving as a non-controlled substance. And so we've done a lot of these like between country changes of both clones and flower and not having that level of consistency and also just interpretation domestically of rules. So I was living and working in Thailand for the last 2 years, and you know that's kind of the Wild West of cannabis these days. big area that everyone's very interested in. And you have these rules where it says, okay, so an extract, anything over 0.2% THC is not allowed to be sold, right? That seems like quite clear to all of us. And then you'd go to stores and they have all these edibles, and the way they did the math was like completely like out of hand. I'm like, no, that's wrong, but it's not stated anywhere clearly. So there's a lot of ambiguity in the rules, and it allows for a lot of these, things like hemp-derived THC to come up because the regulators haven't looked at all of the possible scenarios or cases and looked at the different ways you can manipulate that. And that's kind of what we do, right? We manipulate regulations. We look for those niches and those loopholes. So I enjoy them personally. But when you see like entire countries being like, we're allowed to have this like hemp-derived THC here, it's like 32% like THCA, so it's clearly above 20% THC, but they're allowed to have it because their state doesn't consider converted THC, and the state next door is an absolute like no-no, and so that should be consistent in my opinion.
Well, and your point about it was a brilliant point, and I've never heard someone say it exactly like this, but how the same product changes just based on the country's definition, right? Seeds are a great example. There's no THC in seeds. So according to the United States government, they won't say this. I've actually asked them this question. Well, if it's a marijuana seed, germinates and turns into marijuana, you would think it's marijuana. But until it actually has THC in it, it's hemp. It's something else.
It's the same regulation we have in Germany.
Right.
Also, the wording, like at the end of the day, it's only cannabis sativa. So whether it's hemp or marijuana, or as you say, like hemp THC and cannabis THC, it's actually just cannabis. So I think there's a lot of confusion also in the terms the regulatory try to use, which is adding up to the confusion of the overall regulation. Because, like in Europe, for example, in Switzerland, you say they have 1%. Switzerland is in the middle of Europe. So they have still to go through product by customs, but then you have other countries like Czech Republic that also adapt their law to 1%, and they are inside of the Schengen zone. So that means they can actually ship to wherever in Europe without any customs or declaration or extra tax. And so that end up that's basically in one country it's legal, going to another country where it's not illegal, and the whole, from the European perspective on that market, everything has been confused and everybody's trying to play with the wording, and now the only thing that stand is like the limit of THC, basically anything that is below 0.3 should be allowed, but no claims, then that means no possible extension to a market to actually promote the product for what it can do. So that's really the challenge, I think.
Yeah, and we've seen countries who have a bit of ambiguity in their laws or have a bit more flexibility, really monopolize this. This is why all the clones in Europe come from Austria. Austria has very clear rules that if it is not a flowering plant, they don't have the same level of control over it. Whereas in other countries, they're telling you, even though the clone doesn't have THC, because you know the clone will have THC later, now you can't sell it. And so we've seen that shut down, for example, I was in the middle of ordering clones from the Czech Republic. The order was going to come through, and they called us saying we just applied for the permit, and just today when we applied, they told us no more, because those clones are going to become high THC plants and you can't sell in the middle of 1,000 clone order. And I had to frantically find new clones from Austria. And so then Austria, because of their rule, waiting up until it gets to a flowering plant, which I think personally makes sense, it allows them to have a lot of freedom. And so I think Austria by far has the largest number of clone manufacturing facilities in all of Europe due to the kind of ambiguity in their law and the ability to grow all the way up until basically a vegetative plant as essentially a non-controlled substance.
Yeah, you want to make plannable decisions if you run a business. That's the most important thing. And maybe it's odd to say, but the stricter the regulation is, the more properly and without headaches you can make your business.
Yeah, it's probably pros and cons, right? So less opportunity, but clear path maybe. So
the issue, I think, is that also there's a lot of hidden lobbying or agenda that every time it comes to cannabis to regulator, even so there is the framework that can allow it. At some point, we don't know why the regulator flipped, and then from one day to another, they just decide, okay, no more. And that's a big challenge for operator itself, because they have to make a long-term investment.
But Sebastian, do you have for CBD products specific regulation in France? How does it work?
No, basically the main law is anything below 0.3. The flower has been accepted, but it's not regulated as whatever the quality standard of it. So does it need to have like zero contaminant in terms of bio, like bacteria, mold, and so on. There is also a lot of washing happening because to get 0.3
You have to wash out the CBD?
Exactly, so a lot of residue of solvents also there. Nobody's testing.
Chemicals is allowed?
Well, basically there is no standard, so anything is possible. And from a customer perspective, you have very a lot of lack of transparency.
I mean, for me as a German with our nice regulation, I mean, at least we have one.
Yeah.
I have, I can do extraction, but without using solvents. At least I know that.
Yeah, but
and you are facing basically as a wholesaler or customer, your CBD has been washed, and you don't know with whatever, and you don't know if the guy who's doing that was entitled to do it or not.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why after the brand can come into the pictures to show that traceability and quality. But again, then after we bump into what we were talking about, the possible marketing online and possible fake and all of that. So it's very rushed. And now the last thing that will come up for the flower is being considered as a tobacco product. So in Belgium, Luxembourg, they have already issued like tax stamp to it. And because it's a tobacco product, then they say, okay, well, we don't need any control, and because it kills anyway.
I'm wondering why France is so slow in developing tax stamps.
That's a good question.
But I think Germany is a very good example also because at the end, we don't have that smokable flower market simply because of the way our laws are, not even how they're written out, but how they are executed. Because we have what is called the intoxication clause. So if you sell a product that has cannabinoids, you have to make sure that nobody can get intoxicated from it, like broadly spoken. So at the end is if you buy hemp flower, but you buy 10 kilos and you bake it into a cookie, right? Then in theory, you might get high. And this is why it's not allowed. This hopefully is going to change soon, but I mean, that's good. That's just a different side of that coin, right? So we have the regulation. The execution of it is wild. Yeah, and then, do you want to say?
Yeah, we mentioned this in the pre-discussion, right? Like when I went to Switzerland for the first time, up to 1% is quite high. That's actually a very high THC limit. And so for me, somebody who's been using high-potency cannabis for a very long time, I feel nothing. I can smoke quite a bit of it, and I don't feel anything. I would just be smoking while I was working all day because I couldn't feel anything. It was just, felt like passing time. And then we'd have other people who were like, do you want to try the flower we produce at the facility at like the staff party? And they'd be like passed out on the floor by like 2 p.m. And I'm like, what is happening? So, I mean, it's like one of those things where you're saying, like, you put the limit to 1%. If you smoke enough 1% THC product, you will get high, like if you smoke a bunch of it. And so there really has to be that kind of sort of left to the consumer, at least, to make their own decisions. And that, I think, is like my number one challenge with cannabis. Even the laws in Canada, where I first started in the cannabis space, there's this level of like policing where it's like, as an adult, I can go into a liquor store in Canada, I can buy 20 liters of vodka and I can drink them and nobody can stop me. But I can't go into the cannabis store and buy at the time, more than 5 beverages, which is not enough to like do any damage. But there's this level of like over policing that I think is done with cannabis because it was a narcotic and it has such a bad stigma to it that we don't really see in any comparable product. Same thing with cigarettes. If I want to go and buy 3 tons of cigarettes, nobody is going to stop me. And that's obviously not very healthy for you to use. I can try it today. Let's go.
Well, yeah, you could probably do it. So I'm looking at the time a little bit. So I think it's very interesting. So what do we do? So do we get the same standards everywhere? Do you want to rather have the Wild West?
I think you could do a backstop, right? You could do something like harmonized GMP requirements.
Yes.
You could have some, I mean, and look, there's already harmonization. If you're talking about medical devices, for example, not every country has the same medical device regulations, but if you want to get a cross clearance between, say, Health Canada and the FDA, there are standards to do that, or a notified body in the EU, or whatever it is. So you need to have a floor. The ceiling, I guess, is really up to the countries, but we've seen time and time again, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in Europe, when regulators just throw their hands up and say, we're going to say 0.3% because nobody could consume any amount that would get them high at 0.3%, industry is going to move way faster and make heavy products, and those will get people high when you have 100 milligrams of THC in them. And so I think if regulators say we're not going to do anything, that just inures the benefit of the bad actors and the consumers are harmed, Whereas the leading members of industry, clients that we represent on this panel, are going to say, we want rules. We're begging you for rules. Just make some sort of standard so that people trust what we're doing, and that our competitors who don't care, who are making this stuff in a bathtub, so to speak, are finally stamped out of the market. So I think you could very easily have a minimum floor set of regulations that countries, frankly, are already adhering to in other spaces.
Yeah, but sometimes it's easy, but sometimes, like in Götz's case, like morality comes in, right? So what we here in Europe maybe think, well, they should put a stop to this. United States, no, it's freedom of speech. So what's your stance at it? So just Götz's.
Oh, it's difficult to say all that, it's quite obvious that it's so difficult. It's so different. That's what I wanted to say. That's the right word. It's so different between all the countries, especially if you go to the States. I mean, we've been talking to lawyers in the States. I don't remember, it was Montana or something. I don't remember, to be honest. And
they're all the same, really.
They're all the same. Okay. But however, and it was interesting to see how dangerous it can be to make that your business there. I mean, if it's really like if you go over the border and you do the wrong thing, then you can get in prison. So it's so difficult in these countries, and then on the other hand you have Europe, which tries to. I mean, we're still not harmonized, but we're trying to, at least in certain aspects. So, yeah, long story short, I think it has to go through another time of reorganization and and standardization, definitely. I mean, that's a very general reply, but I think that's it. And a lot will happen also, as I said, also on social media. They will see what happens. I mean, I think that's really different and difficult because as we realize more and more that, this is the bottleneck where everything happens somehow, at least, to a certain point. And also with this point of deep fakes, I don't want to come back to it, but it's true. It's mine. I mean, there you can see how different it is. Yeah.
Yes.
I just wanted to come back of the GMP solution, which I agree with that, but if you look at how different the GMP levels means from if you are in Asia, if you are in Europe, or if you are in Germany, or it looks like it's already there that people need to harmonize just on the international standards because there is so much discrepancy between each country. Like if you ship, like you were mentioning earlier, an example, you were shipping marijuana or like medical cannabis, ITHC from Canada as a declare, and then it comes in Switzerland as a legal light cannabis, CBD. So I think it needs to be like globalized standards, like what is this GMP cannabis, and I will finish on this point on the fact that I think it's a lot of the regulator that needs to do also the work and not just put general standards, but for specific product, whether it's a high THC product, that will be require this level of GMP and all the process GCP, and for like a CBD product, maybe a different way, maybe lower high hand, because it's not like as a medical. So I think it's really case to case, and the regulator, it's just too much work, I think, for them. So we are doing the work for them in the preliminary, but at the end, it needs to come on a global level.
Yeah, maybe the harmonization could be in a way that we have a specific cannabis sativa regulation instead of pressing cannabis for medical purposes into a pharmaceutical world, which is GMP, with all its hurdles. No one knows exactly. I mean, we buy our first sources in Spain, so we have to sign a contract, easy. But, so they want us to have a stamp. What the fuck? I don't have a stamp in Europe, in Germany anymore. No, the Spanish regulator, we're talking about the same EU GMP. Same EU GMP. The stamp is a little example, but you can put it in a way bigger detail, which is more or less a deal breaker. And we're talking about Europe, a standardized, harmonized, economical region, should be.
So I reckon you bought a stamp, I guess, and you solved that?
Paint does magic.
But I mean, I don't know if you wanted to say this, but I mean, Canada, we talked about it, is a good example because they did that, right? So they took cannabis out of that and just put it, when they legalized it, they created like entire new category, right? I don't know if that's where you wanted to go, but
Yeah, so I mean, Canada developed GPP, which did not exist prior to cannabis. So we had the food regulations, and I worked in food. We had pharmaceutical regulations, which are our GMP, which is domestic to Canada only. And then they said, okay, nothing really fits. And there haven't been a lot of other countries that have done that. And I really don't agree with flower in particular being under GMP, even though I'm a certified pharmaceutical GMP professional, even though half of my work is doing flower facilities and getting them GMP qualified. I don't really agree with it because it is a product that is a combustible. It is a product that we can't even get labs to really agree on. Like the microbial limits for cannabis, we've had independent studies where we take really dirty cannabis, where it's like 3-4 times the European limits, and we've lit it up inside of a vacuum and collected all of the dust, and it runs clean on micro. So like we have a lot of problems with the current standards that have been put in place, which is like, here's a product that's kind of a medicine, but it's kind of used recreationally, but it's lit on fire, and it's grown in an agricultural context, so it's not controlled, and there's going to be a lot of variability. And so I think obviously with the speed to legalization has been quite quick in some areas, and because of the speed, they've just felt like we have to just stick it anywhere. Like, what is the best thing to put it inside of? And then you have it lumped into GMP with, you know, sterile manufacturing and really high-end pharmaceutical products where it doesn't make sense. And another challenge too is that some countries have just medical and some countries have recreational, some have both. And then you have Thailand, which removed cannabis from the narcotics altogether. So everyone's trying to get product from Thailand into Germany, except that Germany wants it to come through a narcotics control board, but Thailand doesn't consider it a narcotic. So it's, again, these like, no one's having these deep conversations about these like country to country movements and how they make sense. And how do we navigate the fact that, like, you know, Thailand is a great example versus Canada versus Germany, but Thailand was like, anything goes, we don't really care. And then Canada was like, we're going to set up, you know, a recreational legislation and a medical legislation with like a lot of thought. And then Germany was like, okay, medical is going to be GMP, and recreational, we're just going to like do this weird kind of model and see what happens, basically.
We don't have specific rules for cannabis clubs in Germany for quality control. That's a huge issue. I mean, for our club, we're using medical standard-ish, I mean, without all the documentation. But for a small little association, 500 members only, not allowed to do business.
Yeah, non-profit.
That's a hustle, and it's a high standard to follow.
Yeah, so just looking at time, just final words. The perfect regulation is, and you just finish the sentence, okay? The perfect regulation is, and then we take questions if you have questions, okay? Because we have a little bit of time left.
I would say one that's actually crafted with people from the cannabis space involved in the development of it, with one that's taken the lessons learned from all the different countries where we've seen 60 different models rolled out, what worked well, what didn't work well, and one that is like really understanding both the use that medical and recreational are separate.
Well, I think from the technique point of view, there's not much to add. I would just say, just to get inspired from how plants, medicinal plant was used in the past. We're looking at herbalist practice. There's a lot of pharmacopoeia out there. Actually, cannabis was in the pharmacopoeia. The American Herbal Association produced a very nice monograph in 2014. And I think if we'll, on top of it, keep that mindset of it's a plant, a medicinal plant, I think that will also answer, like, get a key to get the right evolution on the regulation.
Maybe a perfect regulation could be an ISO standard, which is easier to implement internationally. And then any country agrees upon, if you follow this specific standard, let's say ISO cannabis, off you go, and you don't have any issues, and this is internationally, everyone's the same. Like you said, maybe a different approach, but an ISO standard, everyone agrees upon this specific standard. If you follow the standard, off you go, with no hurdles.
Mm-hmm. I think the perfect regulation is the one that's flexible but predictable. So I'm thinking of something like, in the United States, we have quality system regulation for medical devices. A whole host of medical devices, types of medical devices, functionalities, what they cure, what they treat, but they all have to comply with the floor of the regulations, right? And so the FDA can't possibly think about what device is going to be created in 20 years that we can't even fathom today, but they can say, you have to adhere to these, I'm making it up 9, it's way more than 9, sets of frameworks. And the other thing is, we have to account for international harmonization. So it's not that we have to have the same regulations in the States as Germany or as Amsterdam, but there has to be a way for the languages to talk to one another, right? To say, we want to import this product for our medical system or for research. Here's what you need to do in order to do that. And it has to actually be able to be accomplished with the regulators talking to one another to know when they get a piece of documentation from Germany, a phytosanitary certificate, they're going to be able to read it and understand and interpret it.
Yeah, especially if you want to get rid of the trade deficit, I guess. So it's, right, so Guts, final word.
Yeah, I mean, he already gave the solution, so that's how it's got to be, easy and flexible. And I mean, perhaps I give a little, the philosophical final words is, it's so different in all the societies of around the world, around the globe. You need something which is small regulation at least, and a good flexible regulation. Otherwise, it won't happen. We can see it now here in Germany. We don't know where it's going to, because I mean, we have a different government now, and so yeah, people do not commit the same way at that stage to cannabis as others. So yeah, that's basically it.
Perfect, thank you. We might have time for a quick question, maybe?
Maybe one. Is there
one quick question?
Let's hear it for the panel, first of all. I think everyone has been sufficiently illuminated, and they probably have long, deep, involved questions that they would like to ask you in the hallway.
That's always possible. Thank you.
Yeah, let's hear it again, one more time, and we're going to move on. That was great. This is the International Cannabis Business Conference, Berlin 2025. We're going to get right into this next one.